Hi everyone, welcome to EDG Guru channel. This video is all about an introduction to C programming. So let's get started. What is a C programming? How can we define a C programming? The C programming is one of the core and fundamental programming language. It is one of the core programming language, and that's why sometimes it also referred as an mother language. The C language was developed by a scientist named Dennis Ritchie at AT&T Bell Laboratory of USA in 1972. It shows the pictorial view of historical development of C language. In 1960, ALGOL stands for Algorithmic Language was developed by International Committee. In 1963, CPL stands for Combined Programming Language was developed at Cambridge University. In 1967, Basic Combined Programming Language was developed by scientists named Martin Richard at Cambridge University. In 1970, D language was developed by scientists named Ken Thompson at AT&T Laboratory. To overcome the limitations of all these earlier programming languages, in 1972, C language was developed by a scientist named Dennis Ritchie at AT&T Laboratory. C is also to be called as a middle level language. C can also be referred as a middle level language. There are two types of languages, high level language and low level language. C stands in between these two languages. It has both the features. It has the features of high level language as well as it has the features of low level language, and that's why it is called as a middle level language. Let's understand it with example. There are two types of languages, high level language and low level language. The high level language is the language in which, or a high level language is one in which mainly focus on, high level language is one which mainly focus on the programming logic rather than focusing on the underlying hardware. It mainly focuses on the programming logic rather than focusing on underlying hardware. And since it does not focus on the underlying hardware, it is system independent language. It can referred as a system independent language, and it is easy to understand, right? So high level language is the language which mainly focus on programming logic logic rather than underlying hardware. High-level language is one which focuses on programming logic rather than underlying hardware, and thus it is easy to understand. And since the high-level language is a focus on programming logic rather than an underlying hardware, it is system-independent language. It is system-independent language. Right. Now, low-level language. What is a low-level language? The low-level language is the language which focuses on underlying hardware. The low-level language is the language which focuses on underlying hardware. And since it is focused on underlying hardware, it is difficult to understand, and it is system dependent language. It is hard to understand. It is hard to understand since it is focused on underlying hardware and it is system dependent language. The low-level language is the language which can use to create the system softwares. The low-level language can be used to create the system softwares such as an operating system, drivers and etc. So there are two types of languages, high level language and low level language. High level language is machine dependent language. It mainly focus on machine independent language which mainly focus on programming logic rather than underlying hardware. Since it is focused on programming logic and does not focus on underlying hardware, it is easy to understand and it is system independent language. Low level language is the language which focus on underlying hardware, and since it is focused on underlying hardware, it is hard to understand and it is system dependent language. The low level language can be used to create the system software such as an operating systems. So where the C stands, whether the C is a high level language or C is a low level language. Language has an features of both the language, high level language as well as an low level language. The C level C language is called as an middle level language. C language has an features of high level language such as it is machine independent language. Okay, it is machine independent language. C language can be used for programming logic as well. Also, the C programming language also to be used to create the system software, means it uses the low level language features as well. So C language uses the feature of both high level language and low level language, and that's why the C language is called as an middle level language. Right. Next is C programming is system programming language. Since the C programming is used to create the system software, we have seen here the C programming is C language uses the low level language features, and thus it used to create the system softwares, and thus it is also called as an system programming language. Next is C is also called as an structured language. C is also called as an structured language. Now what is meant by structured language? Structured language means the language which is well structured. The language which is well structured, in which, or the language in which the problem or the program is divided into the parts or blocks in order to make it well structured. That language called as a structured language. Language in which problem or program is divided into parts or blocks in order to make it more structured. That language called as a structured language. Now the question arises is why the C language? Why the C language is structured language? Why the C language is structured language? Now the question arises why the C language is called as a structured language, right? Since the C supports the functions, since there is a concept in C language called as in functions, it is called as a structured language because the functions make the C programs well structured, and that's why it is called as a structured language, because by using functions we can divide the larger programs into the blocks or into the functions. That's why it is called as a structured language. What is the functions? Functions are nothing but a block of statements used to perform the specific task. For example, we need to perform the some kind of calculations. So in one program we need to perform the particular kind of calculations 1000 times, 2000 times, let's suppose. Then instead of writing that code again and again throughout the programs, again and again, what we do is we simply create the functions named as an calculations. We write the particular statements required for that particular operation, that particular calculation inside that functions, and whenever we will need to perform that kind of calculations in our program, we simply call that functions. Instead of writing that code again and again, we simply call that functions, and thus the functions helps to reduce the code. It helps to reduce the code. It makes the program very simple. It helps to reduce code. Also, it helps to reduce the complexity of program. It helps to reduce complexity of program, and thus it makes the program well structured. It makes the program program well structured or simple, and that's why the C language is called as a structured language. The next is the C language is also called as a portable language. Portable language means it is system independent language, since the program which created on one machine can run on any machine without changing it or without modifying it, and that's why it is machine independent language. Since it is a portable language, it can port from one machine to another machines without changing it, and that's why it is called as a portable language. Let's understand it with example. Let's suppose we have two machines, machine A and machine B. And let's suppose we have written the program 1 on machine A, and that program 1 can run on machine B without changing it, without modifying it. Thus, it is called as a portable language. It can port from one machines to another machines. The program written on one machines can port to another machines, can run on another machines without changing it, without modifying it. Thus, it is called as a portable language. This is all about an basics of C language. Thank you for watching.